One of my favorite parts about modern worship and tech is the ability to use tracks during worship. And taking that one step further, I love that now we're able to easily integrate our own original worship stems during worship. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 7 simple steps so that you're able to start using your original worship stems during your Sunday services. Hey, my name is Brian Bolivar, and I am the worship leader at Rock Harbor Church. I'm also a music producer, songwriter, and artist, and I've been writing and recording music for over 15 years for myself and others. Now let's jump into the DAW, and I'll show you how to get your stems ready for worship. Okay, so now that we're here in Logic, the first thing that I always like to do is actually build out my clicks and guides before I kind of get started on the next step. So at MultiTracks.com, they have a bunch of free resources, and some of that stuff is the guides as well as the click tracks that we all know and love. So basically what I do, and I won't bore you with this whole process because it can take a minute, but basically I'm picking a higher click sound for the first beat and then a lower one for the following 3. So let me show you what that sounds like. And then I literally just copy and paste it all the way down to the very end of the session. So as you can see here, the click will end right when the track ends, which is right here. So we'll see. So it ends right there. And the next phase is I go ahead and I create the guide cues. So in the MultiTracks folders you can get the dynamic and section guide cues. So this is like the count in stuff.
1, 2.
And then here is
1, 2. Vamp.
Like the arrangement. And then further down when we have some dynamic stuff, so it'll say all in right here.
Intro. All in.
So then basically what you're doing is you just go through your track and, you know, the 4 count leading into the next section, you just drop the appropriate cue in and then you should be good to go. So once the clicks and guides are in place, I go through and basically organize each section, you know, because as I'm producing these songs, I'm just sort of in the creative flow and I'm not necessarily trying to keep everything exactly organized because I just want to get ideas to the DAW. So basically I'll go through and I'll kind of put sections together that kind of go together. So in this case, I'm using programmed drums. We will be, you know, replacing these drums with real drums, and we honestly won't even be using these drums during worship. But I grab all of the quote unquote organic drum elements like drums, programmed drums. So I've got these here. You can kind of hear that's happening there. And then I've got any cymbals, any kind of toms. We've got all this kind of stuff here that all goes together that would kind of fall into the organic drum category. After that, I add what I consider to be ear candy or percussion elements. So we've got all the kind of swells and swoops and as well as, you know, tambourines and shakers. And I call that perk. So then the following category, I always go to bass. For this song, I actually have real bass, which of course is called Bruce because I named my bass Bruce because dark night is the color. So it's basically bat bass. So don't judge me, but I named my bass Bruce. So then after that, I bring in the other bass elements. So I have, you know, several layers of synth bass. And then next down is piano, which is, you know, a typical organic piano sound for worship. So that's next. And then so once we're in the keys and I kind of do the other keys. Now this one says EG, but it's really just a programmed synth part. So then the other synth type elements will be underneath there going down the line here. And then once we kind of get through those, then we're on to the acoustic guitars. I have a left and a right acoustic guitar, so I will bounce those together, but I want them to be by each other. Then we're on to the electric guitar section, so I have all the electric guitars that I played in. And then after electric guitars, we get down to vocals. Honestly, for this, I won't even be using vocals in the stems, but obviously for the recording's sake, I recorded vocals in. But either way, I like to have them all the way down at the bottom, and people like the color code stuff, and I do have a little bit of that going on, but overall it's pretty simple. So now that I have all of my elements where I want them to be, we're going to go in and actually bounce them down together, because as you can see in this current session with the vocals that we're not going to use, but even with that, we have 104 tracks. If you put 104 tracks into Playback, it may explode. I'm not sure of the rules of it, but it's possible. So we're going to bounce down as much of this into single tracks as we can. That way when we open the files in Playback, it won't be so overwhelming. So next step is we're actually going to bounce them down. Now, I like to do those together in a certain way that makes it simple, because ultimately you don't need to individually bounce every element, because this isn't sending out for mix, this is sending out for stems. So honestly, the way I approach this is the least amount of tracks, the simpler it is to manipulate those, because ultimately during worship, we're not going to be doing front of house individually mixing each stem of the project. That's sort of our job as we are mixing for the worship. So I'm going to show you how I bounce those right now. So I'm going to show you how I pair these together. So basically you just hold shift and arrow down to grab the ones you want. And then I hit solo. So now we should only hear the guide.
1, 2, vamp, 2, 3, 4.
And I have some dynamic elements as well as section elements for the guides, and I want them to be together, because when we go to upload it, we only have one track for guides. Otherwise, there'd be so much going on. So basically, to do this, we just, like I said, shift, hold down, and then bounce again. I'm going to call this guide, and all the settings should stay the same. So I'll bounce those, and then we will roll on to the next section. Okay, so now I've got all the stems bounced the way that I like to do that. Now, I will say that I'm treating it like we are preparing it for worship, because we are. So that means that I've got bass guitar by itself, I've got piano by itself, I've got the drums by itself, I've got acoustic by themselves. Even though I'm not going to probably use all of these elements, obviously, because we'll have those live musicians on stage. But as I'm thinking through how I want to pair the bounces and how I want to put the stems together, I'm thinking about those elements like, okay, I know I'm going to have an acoustic guitar player. I'm not going to have that in the track, so I'm going to bounce those together. I know that, I have my main Telecaster electric guitar parts that are right and left and kind of similar, so I'm going to call that EG1, and so on and so forth. So it's thinking through intentionally how you want to have those elements show up on stage together is the way I like to pair them together. And then for the next step, as a bonus tip, I like to run these through my actual mastering chain. Now, it's a very simple mastering chain. We're going to jump into Logic again, and I'm going to show you that. But I like to do this to give that extra level of push, professionalism, and control over the overall volume. So let's jump back into Logic, and I'll show you how I master these. Then we'll rebounce them, and then we'll get them ready for upload. Okay, so now we're back here in Logic, and all I'm going to do is drag our initial mixes in, our initial mixed stems into the session. Line them up B1. Create new tracks. Let those pop in. So we need to make sure that everything's lined up at the beginning of the track with a click. So let's just make sure that's happening.
1, 2, vamp, 2, 3, 4.
All right, so everything sounds to be in there just fine. So basically all we're going to do here is run it through a simple mastering chain. So what I want to do is go down here to the most kind of exciting part of the track. And I will say too, at this point of the game, I didn't decide to add any vocals in. I have some BGVs, but I just didn't want to add those in, because since I'll be probably the one singing this one, I didn't really want to have Milli Vanilli vibes with background vocals of my own. First thing is I've got the Magma channel. I love the wave stuff, especially now that we're using the LV1 system at Rock Harbor. We have access to all these plugins for live worship. So it really kind of pairs great with doing this work, a lot of this work with Waves plugins. So I'm using my friend and mastering engineer's presets here, Drew Levine, just making sure everything is adding a little bit more glue and saturation. Next thing is I've got your friend and mine, the Logic Graphic EQ again, just doing a little bit more boosting in the high end, a little bit there in the upper mids, adding a bit more saturation, but not a ton. Yeah, and just kind of gluing it together a little bit further. Next in the chain, we've got the ozone equalizer. I like to use tonal balance too, so I like to use the ozone EQs as well to do a little bit of boosting and cutting while I'm watching those meters in tonal balance, but not doing too much. Then we've got the almighty imager to spread it out. So I love, especially for worship, having a wide mix. And although this is technically a demo mix for stems, pushing out wide really helps that stereo spread to sound nice and full, which is one of my main reasons for wanting to add tracks in the first place to worship. And then also I'm using Soothe here, doing a little bit of dynamic EQ. Soothe just does some cool things, and I don't have it really too heavy here, but just doing a little bit of work. And then the final thing is the L3 limiter. So one thing that MultiTracks.com says is to have your ceiling at -3 dB. I found that's actually still too loud. So I like to bring mine down to -6, and that seems to blend in. One of the main points of this is to have seamless transitions between our own original songs and the ones that we use from other artists. So basically all I do is just bring it in to the loudest point, and just make sure that nothing is over the top, which all I'm going to do from here on out is make sure that my cycle range is selected, but we already know it's the correct length because we did that work in the mixing phase. So we'll be up here at the top in alphabetical order. We got the acoustic guitars first. Just make sure that's what's going to play. Awesome. So we're just going to hit Command B again. And instead of doing it at where we did before, we're going to do it at 16-bit 44.1. That all looks good. Hit OK. And then I actually want to replace the mixed stems with the mastered ones so I don't get confused. So I'm just going to call it AG. Then I'm going to hit a hyphen and then God is, and send it to the same external. And I'm going to send those through, and I will do this process one at a time until I've replaced all of the stems, and then we'll be ready to upload it to MultiTracks. All right, so now we have officially bounced our file down. We have it in a compressed file, and now we need to go into multitracks.com, which is where I am here, and I am in the library section. We're going to add a song. Go down here, add a cloud song. Then we're going to fill out this info. Title, God is. It's going to say that song doesn't exist. We want to create it. Sure do. Sure do. Then we're going to go to the artist. In this case, we're going to call it RH Worship. Then we'll set the key, which is B flat. Then we'll set it B flat major. And then we'll go ahead and we'll set it at the BPM, which is 110, 4/4. And I think that's all the info that we need for that. So now we're going to create the song. It's going to do its bleeps and its bloops. And then it will create a song. Now we have a song. So the first section here we want to do is add our tracks. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the folder that I have so conveniently created. We're going to go ahead and drop the God is zip file here. And this might take a minute. It says preparing upload. So then we just have to wait until that's done. And then we're going to go and jump into Playback and actually set up our section markers in the cloud song. We can open a set list. So we'll just call this God is. Okay, so now we're going to add a song in. Now that we're there, we're going to go to Library, Song. So now we're going to make sure everything looks right. We can decide if we want to only bring in some of the tracks, which in our case, I'm going to do that. We can actually select the key, which is really cool because now that it's in the system, we're going to be able to actually adjust the keys depending on the week. And I think when we actually use this song for the first time, we're going to do it in the key of A. But for today's purposes, we'll add it in. Now we will hit done. Give it a second to load in. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to hit edit. And then down here, we're going to select cloud section. So now we can go through each section of the song and actually add in the section, which is important when we sync with the cloud song in MultiTracks. Just got to hit the plus sign. Song section. Then this is going to actually be the count off. So we add that in and add the marker. So now our first section is, as you can see, is that CO. So now we're going to go through each part of the song and add the section in and show you what that looks like once we jump back in to multitracks.com. So now we're in our track screen here and we can see we've got all of our section labels. So now, because we just spent the time to add those cloud markers in, now when we go here, we can see all of the actual sections are populating, which is really great. There's a whole tutorial here on MultiTracks of how to actually upload chords, because the way they do it is a little different. Basically with the vamp, there are no chords because it's just the intro. So then we move into the intro part. We're gonna go ahead and set up this section. And the first step of that is picking your chord. So since there's no lyrics here, we basically start with a bracket. So once you open a bracket, it'll start to suggest chords, which is really helpful because finding the bracket is half the battle. So then I know the first note is B flat. So we select the chord. So then what I like to do is I'll just copy and paste because I don't have to find the brackets over and over again. And I will just go in and start adding the chords. So I know the second chord is G minor, so it will suggest those chords and I will click them and it will be great when that happens. The third chord is indeed E flat, which is the fourth chord in the scale of B flat major. And that's it for the intro. So then what I'll do is I'll move into the verse section. And this is where it takes a little bit of time to dial this in, but I've done it a bunch of times, so I know how to do it kind of quickly. So the first thing we want to do is get the lyrics and make sure that our lyrics are right. So I will add those in. So now we have our lyrics in. We have to know, obviously, how the chords fall. So I know that the first chord comes in here on the L. So I'm going to paste in the B flat. So depending on where it falls determines if you need spaces or where it goes. So if it's right on the 1, which in this case it is the L of laid is on the 1, I know that that's where that chord sits. And then the next part sits right between the A and D of foundations, which is another G minor. And then the last chord, the flat, goes there. So if I go up here to save and preview, it's going to generate the chords we've made so far. You can kind of see that happening now. So we can see the chords are displaying just the way we want them to. And then here we can check our work. And it's definitely good to check because, you don't want to get too far in. But everything is kind of laying right where I want it to go. So now I'm basically going to go through each section and I'm going to go and do the same thing. And, once we get to choruses and stuff, we can copy and paste those sections so it doesn't take quite as much effort. But it's definitely worth doing this because this is what will allow your song to show up in the Chart Builder app, which is really important for them to stay on top of things. So I'm going to go do the rest of this and then we'll jump back in for the final step. Now we have all of our song sections and lyrics and chords in place. And as you can see on the right side, it previews how it's going to look, which is just the way we're used to seeing it on Sunday morning through Chart Builder, which is really great because, when you take the extra time to do this, it will help populate in Chart Builder. And even though at this point, we can't hear the stems through Chart Builder, so MultiTracks, if you're listening, we would love that to be a feature that gets added to where these original stems, the cloud songs, actually show up in Chart Builder as well to play along just like all the other songs do. But until then, whenever that feature does become available, it'll pop up. But for now, we've got everything in order so that way the team can follow along through cloud songs in Chart Builder and MultiTracks as well. So I hope seeing this process from start to finish will help show you that it's not difficult to get our original worship stems loaded in and able to use on Sunday mornings. I believe that God is calling a lot of us to share original worship songs at our churches, and with this technology, using this cloud, and I know there's probably other ways to do this, but this is the way that I've been doing it at Rock Harbor, and it's been working great. And I would encourage you to do the same thing because it's always my heart with sharing original worship songs, not that the congregation even knows that they come from me, but that they seamlessly fit into the set list and bring more clarity to what God is trying to speak through the worship portion so we can stick our songs in the middle of the set because we have all of the stems in place. And in my opinion, a really cool way to share our gifts and talents with our congregations. And I'll see you in the next video.